Good afternoon. My name is Brian Heck. I'm the city manager for the city of Springfield. It's unfortunate that we come to you today, an event last night in our community that was meant to honor the life of someone taken from violence, turned into violence itself. And our thoughts, our prayers go out to those injured in the incident. We're hopeful that all will make a full recovery and that we can start to see an end to the specific gun violence that we've seen throughout our community this past year. Today we will be talking a little bit about the specifics of the incident. Chief Lee Graff will do that here momentarily, but first I'd like to have our Mayor, Warren Copeland, say a few words.
I thought it was just important for me to be here. As you know, the city manager is the one who is responsible for the city more than the mayor. And of course, the chief is the one deeply involved in this reality. Any mayor in the world, certainly in the United States, hates to see a day like this come. And we are hopeful, as Brian said, that we won't end up with losing but anybody as a result. And we are also hopeful that whoever did this comes forward.
With that, I will turn it over to Police Chief Lee Graff, who will talk more specifically about the incident. After that, we would entertain some questions and try to answer those to the best of our ability.
Thank you, Brian Warren. My name is Lee Graff. I'm the Chief of the Springfield Police Division. The reason we're here today is last night at approximately 1:49 a.m., dispatch center began receiving calls that there was some type of emergency at 1935 South Yellow Spring Street. As they spoke to callers, it became apparent there was some type of shooting incident there with multiple victims. Numerous officers arrived, started rendering aid. They found several people that had gunshot wounds, trying to get those folks up to the hospital and to get aid, and also at the same time trying to get witnesses to see what had happened. At the time the officers arrived, it was pretty apparent that there were no suspects in the area, that the suspects had already come in and had fled. So they had some officers searching the areas around Springfield looking for the suspects, and the bulk of the officers were there rendering aid to the victims and starting crime scene investigation and investigations as far as information. As has already been said, only one of the 6 victims, only one was care flighted that had gunshot wounds to the chest. The information that I have is that this is not life-threatening at this time. The other victims, there were 5 others that had various gunshot wounds, were treated at the hospital last night. I'm not sure if anybody's still at the hospital or if most were treated and released, but those were not life-threatening. Officers, the detectives came in from the Crimes Against Persons unit. The entire unit of all 6 plus a sergeant were there working with victims and witnesses. Our crime scene unit came in, and because of the complexity of this particular scene, because of the number of victims, and the fact that, as was alluded to, this the gathering that started out as a gathering of folks that had rented a hall or this beauty shop that rented itself out to things like parties and gatherings. It was pretty full, and so it was a pretty chaotic scene as officers arrived with people leaving, and of course all the people that were hurt. So they also, the crime scene, when they got there, made a call to BCI for the Attorney General's office, the Bureau of Criminal Investigations, to come out as well and assist them with the crime scene, which they did. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that we had called out for help from Clark County Sheriffs as well as the Highway Patrol, and like BCI, readily responded to help us out because we had that scene that had a fair amount of people, but we also know that in incidents like this, in any kind of shooting or accident, usually the hospital is going to get hit with a crowd of people, family and relatives and friends, and understand they're upset, they're worried, and they're grieving, but sometimes that can get a little out of hand. And so everybody responded to the hospital as well, and everything was handled as well as possible. As I speak, those officers worked throughout the night. They were still working this morning and this afternoon. So we're going to continue to work on this, and as Warren said, Mayor Copeland, hopefully we'll bring this to as swift a conclusion as we can, reference identifying suspects, and going forward from there. We would ask, of course, that I'm sure that some people were there who had left before officers even arrived. For anyone in the public that has any information on this whatsoever, doesn't matter how important you may think it is, you never know what's important, to please contact Springfield Police Division. You can call our dispatch center at 937-324-7680 and just ask to be connected with the police department to leave us that information. We appreciate it.
Again, this is a very unfortunate event that has occurred in our community. We were fortunate in the fact with the size of the crowd, with the limited number of the victims that were injured, and that there were no fatalities, but still one act of violence, specifically with the use of guns, is one too many in our community, and it's something that we hope that we can start to have an impact and effect in changing the trajectory of what we're seeing over the past year in terms of the use of gun violence.
Yeah, we, as you may have even seen, I believe the New York Times just ran with a story talking about how they feel that it's going to be a hard summer for city reference violence. We've been gearing up for that as we've gone through this last year with COVID and seen some uptick in gun violence. We've got our Safe Streets Task Force, which is a select set of officers that work specifically on problems like this and other community issues and quality of life issues, the investigations units as well, and uniform patrol, kind of in a concerted effort to exchange information and to be sure that we're taking a look at some of the people out there that we believe are causing some of the gun violence, to essentially try to secure convictions, have them brought in, and of course brought to justice through the system. A lot of times it's a very few people that are causing a lot of chaos in a community, and we hope by running these investigations and bringing some of these people to justice, that by taking them out of the equation, that the violence will slow down as a result.
And again, it's critically important that as a community we come together around this and provide information. So as the chief stated, if you have information related to this incident, we ask you, please reach out to the Springfield Police Division. Providing information can lead to the arrest and can allow us to move forward as a community and put an end to the violence that we're seeing. With that, we'll take questions.
Dr. Michael Wine said that two were in custody. Is that the case right now?
I'm aware of that report. I haven't had any contact in that way with the governor's office, so I can't confirm that. This is an ongoing investigation, of course, so a lot of this is investigative content that I can't comment on. So you would have to talk to the governor's office, reference that report.
How many shooters do you believe there were?
I'm not going to get into detail, but there was more than one, we believe.
And here it says that there's no.
No, I cannot.
Chief, what about the circumstances? If you could give us an estimate on how many people you think were there when the gunfire happened, and then do you think it was an argument between people that were there or someone from the outside coming by and almost like a drive-by?
Once again, you're asking me to get very deep into investigative content. I can tell you that obviously there were a good number of people there for that event. Now, what exactly led to all that, that's what we're working on now. So hopefully as this goes forward, we'll have a clearer picture of that we can give to you. But I wouldn't want to guess, and I wouldn't want to lead you astray.
Are there bullets on the front and the window? So do you know if the people who were hit were the people right there in the front, or there were people that were hiding and things like that? Are they?
Again, this is a large crowd of people, and I'm sure everybody was moving in every different direction. So specifically where everything was, well, that's the hard work that the crime scene folks and BCI had to help us kind of get a real clear picture of exactly what happened. And the victims themselves, as they talked to officers and detectives, to kind of let them know where they were and how things were happening and where suspects were. So it's still a work in progress.
That led to the next question. Do you believe any of the people that opened fire, you said more than one, were actually inside, made it inside when they did that, or just fired from outside?
Well, again, they went to this party to get to the point that they were confronting all these folks. So exactly how far inside or what those circumstances are, we're still working on that.
It says here on the report, no hate crime and no gang activity, so what would you put it under?
Well, that's exactly that. This hasn't been determined to show anything that this was any type of hate crime as defined by federal law and state legislation, and that we don't have any indication that this was any type of gang activity of an organized criminal gang, again, under FBI definitions.
Would you categorize it as a mass shooting?
In the definition of saying that a mass shooting is 3 or more victims, yes. And we understand that, and I understand that's a good bit of why this is getting as much attention as it is, because that's kind of a buzzword. We're upset because we had a shooting in Springfield and multiple people were injured, and we have people that are willing to go in and be that careless and haphazard and unfeeling of people to do that. So I understand the fact that it would be defined as a mass shooting, but I do want to say that this was not of a type that what I think the public typically thinks of as someone going in and just one at a time targeting individuals and shooting them like we see in active shooter tragedies that we've seen throughout the nation. This was an incident where basically a lot of shots were fired and in a large crowd of people, several people were injured.
What do you think the cause of the uptick in gunfire?
If we had all the answers to that, right, because this is a national puzzle that we're all trying to figure out on the uptick of violence. Again, I will tell you this, that it's a very few individuals that are actively going out and exchanging gunfire, whether it's oftentimes when we go through this, and I've been doing this, as most of you have been doing this for a long time, it's often quarrels, revenge, financial, which can be drug-related or other types of financial issues. These ongoing disputes that get to a point with certain individuals who are willing to pull out a gun in the middle of a dispute to resolve that problem. That's not what we want, it's not right, but that's kind of what we're looking at.
Do you think that it's only happening on the south side of town where the resources is less of, that's causing crime?
When you look at crime and you look at shootings and shots fired, they are not all on the south side of town. We have many that are in our central areas of Springfield. I think a lot of it is dependent on where certain people are living, where we have grudges and they're going back and forth to homes. But as far as the lack of resources, no. We respond everywhere equally, and it's not an issue of any type of neglect, I suppose, if that's what you're saying.
You said this was a celebration of life because of violence. Someone was killed because of violence. Can you elaborate on that? Was this person killed, and would this be retaliation?
Again, this is part of investigative content. I did not say that, and I can't get into details on that at this time.
Obviously, a problem we're having is that we wanted to get to you people, but we don't know the answer to a lot of the questions you're asking yet. We assume we will over time, but we just don't know the answers yet, and we don't want to put information out there that turns out to be inaccurate.
Chief, do we know if this was a party that had invitations and a certain number of people were invited for? Did more people show up than expected, and sometimes those parties get distributed? And
well, we have to assume if it's a gathering, somebody got invited. Right. But as far as your question is, did a bunch of people show up, and this was just part of that kind of crowd? The wrong people showed up that didn't get along. We don't know that yet. Again, that's what we're working through.
Were there other injuries other than gunshots? People hurt from anything else?
Yeah, I'm sure there were. I think we probably had a few people that were probably shoved around as people were running and moving out. I do believe they talked about one person that was down. I don't know if the injuries were serious enough to go to a hospital, but that they had fallen down and been stepped on.
Yeah, we heard that some people had drove themselves to the hospital as well.
Yes, and of course that's frequently the case. If someone's injured badly, even within ourselves, if it's not gunfire, you know, you're right there and you take somebody directly to the hospital. But as far as we know at this time, all of the victims did get to the hospital. Once again, to the public, if someone was injured in this that went home and didn't go to the hospital for whatever reason that would be, we certainly, you know, first of all, want them to come forward and get medical treatment or help. But to what we know is the people that we were told had been injured all showed up at the hospital.
Well, question for you, city manager and mayor.
How many of your officers actually took people to the hospital, and what would you say about that, and about their actions to do that?
Well, as far as exactly who took who, I don't have the specific details on that, but I do know, you know, that from responding to scenes like that myself, is that the first priorities is, of course, trying to render first aid to the victims and make sure that they're there and doing okay as we wait for squads to arrive. You know, the idea of just throwing people in the back of the car, well, they're very heroic. They're not given the same amount of treatment that they would if they went up by squad and they had trained EMT professionals taking care of them. But it was a combination of both, and unfortunately, no, I don't think any additional injuries resulted from anything like that.
There were squads that responded
Yes.
and dealt with some of the more serious cases.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I was going to ask city manager and mayor, is there any plans to help that place rebuild, knowing that now it's been shot and it's on the side of town that could use some attention and help?
Well, it turns out that actually that's a project we've already begun. And Shannon Meadows, who's in our community development department, we've had consultants in. We're trying to look at ways to improve that neighborhood significantly. I live on the south side of Springfield. I live a little bit further south where I don't feel there's any significant crime problems. But I drive through the near south side every day going to work and coming back. And so I consider it, you know, my hometown. And we're trying to address these issues, these underlying issues right now, and have committed some significant resources to doing that.
Did the business have any surveillance cameras either outside or inside?
I guarantee you detectives have looked into that, are working on that. I can't give that answer at this time.
What was the age range of the people attending? We see the age range of the victims, but do you know?
Well, like you said, I think if you kind of project off of the age range of the victims, you've got a pretty decent idea of all. So again,
Were any minors there present?
not to my knowledge, but again, without going through everything, I can't specifically say that we're not.
Are there any persons of interest in this? I mean, a lot of people are commenting on social media in this community worried about what this means. Having no suspects at this time, it sounds like, unless Governor DeWine.
Well, I didn't say that, but what I said is that I can't confirm the governor's remarks or where those came from. You know, again, our detectives are working this. When we get to the point where it would be, if we get arrests on this, or if we get persons of interest to the point that we would need to ask for the public's help on this, we will, rest assured. But at this point, it's not going to help the investigation to release all that information at this time. And that's what we want. Ultimately, we need to see closure for these victims and also protect our community. And to do that, we've got to follow a certain amount of protocol. Right? That's what I'm charged with.
What type of resources are y'all giving the families that are going through this?
Springfield has a fairly healthy trauma and crisis network, like, you know, through City Outlook and some others, and mental health and recovery, victims witness out of the courts. So, you know, and typically what happens is this goes through the prosecutors. Often are some of the primary folks who are making those contacts. So there's help there for the victims, and there's help there even for people that were just at the party that I'm sure could be traumatized by this. It's a very traumatic event. So there's help there for them. So I would say that. And our officers are trained in the effects of trauma as well, in crisis intervention, so that when we respond to situations like this, we're aware of what people are going through. And also remember, this has an impact on officers as well. This is not an everyday occurrence. And when you run into a situation like that where you have people screaming for help and and needing you there. It puts a great deal of stress and trauma on the officers as well. And we have systems within the division to deal with that too through our crisis response teams.
Sorry, going a little bit back to the beginning, when did the calls come in and how soon did police arrive?
The initial call, as I said, came at about 1:49. We had officers on scene there, I would say, within the first minute or so. If you go through, we've released, I believe, the 911 tapes and all that. Some of them are pretty frantic, and as they would be. And you can get an idea of that. But officers were on scene fairly quickly. And like I said, the entire shift responded, so you probably had at least 10 units there. With some arriving very early, and then all of them being there probably within a couple minutes.
And so just trying to get a timeline. This started at 1:45. Someone called by 1:49. It was over by 1:51. Police would have been there at 1:50. So the people were like driving off around. I know
Yeah,
like
they develop a range for
Yeah.
kind of when the incident occurred in. And it's a loose range. It's not specifically, okay, this is exactly when we knew everything happened. That's part of what comes out in the investigation. But yeah, by the time officers arrived, the suspects, this went down fairly quickly. Bunch of shots fired, suspects take off. And then, of course, as people are going through all this, multiple cell phone calls and all that into dispatch. And so by the time officers arrived, the suspects had left virtually as soon as the shooting occurred. So, but then they started looking around for any vehicle descriptions they had and those kind of things.
So is there a vehicle description right now?
Like again, it's investigative content, but yes, rest assured, they were trying to gather up who was there, what did they look like, what were they driving. That's very standard for what we do. So.
Have you identified one or two vehicles that may have left that you believe that the shooters were in?
If you're talking to a sense of license plates and all that kind of stuff, again, if the investigators have, we'll work it, but I'm not in a position to confirm any of that at this time.
I know you said you're working on it, so you don't want to release too much, but is there anything people should be on the lookout for? Anything you could say, hey, if you see this type of car, this type of person?
Well, that's a broader question. Again, kind of if you see something, say something, always works very well in the communities. As the mayor and the manager have said, in any situation where we get cooperation from the community, full cooperation, these things are solved very rapidly. When it's harder to get information, it obviously, we have to piece it together and it takes more time. I think in general, people should use common sense. Who you're with and what you're doing and what's going on. And if you think something's suspicious, well, your head told you that for a reason. And you should probably get away from that situation. Or if you think it warrants police presence, call the police and ask them to come out. That's, again, these are very general tips, but they certainly keep a lot of people safe every day when they follow kind of their gut on these kind of things.
So again, I guess my question is, for people who might have been there, is there any threat to the safe community or any threat still out there?
Well, of course, in a situation like this, and we understand this, by the way, the citizens are going to be concerned. Victims are going to be concerned. They're going to be afraid, if I come forward, is that going to cause trouble for me, or am I going to have trouble for these people? And again, we work with that, and we understand that. But I think if we end up getting people in custody, then obviously people know that and they might feel a little safer as far as coming forward with information. So that's the typical pattern we see a lot of times in these situations.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, if no additional questions, I just thank Chief Graff for his report, his information, but also commend our officers who responded and are continuing to work the scene, again, to bring justice to those that were victimized and injured as a result of this incident. So we appreciate the work that our men and women do, to our first responders from our fire rescue division who responded and transported victims, to Springfield Regional Medical in handling and helping and assisting with those that were injured. So we appreciate that, and thank you for your time today.